Good afternoon. I will call this meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, and let's move on to public comments. Mr. Doyle. Do we have any speak?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We have one speaker. How much time can we allot?
No, let's do 3 minutes.
Our sole speaker is Connie Jackson. And I don't have a topic, but I probably could guess.
I put down a topic, but yes, I'm pretty sure you can guess. I'm going to be speaking about road conditions. No, not really. Although it's very difficult to find parking today. But no, I'm going to be speaking about the raise. First, I would like to thank Mr. Ragsdale for finding the money. I'm very glad that the tax digest went up and that he put the money where we all had hoped it would go, which was for the raises. It is with a great deal of gratitude that what I have worked and prayed and badgered everyone about for the last 6 months is the raise. A 2.6% raise is a blessing. It really is. It will bring us competitive with so many of the counties that surround us that I think that it's going to really make an impact. When I was at new teacher orientation yesterday, I was able to speak with a lot of new teachers, and them hearing about that raise made a difference to them. Now, they were already signed. It's not like they were going to say, hey, no raise, I'm going to go ahead and just throw this contract that I signed away. But they were coming, and they were happy. They were enthusiastic. It was beyond words. It was amazing. But even more than that, when I was in schools, I've already been in a couple schools, and I've been talking to longtime teachers. They were excited. Now, these teachers, again, have already signed contracts probably months and months ago. But getting that boost made a difference. It's hard out there. Teachers, we all will agree, are not paid what they're worth. They're not paid enough for the work they do. And neither are bus drivers and food service workers and mechanics and all the other people that make up this district. Neither are board members. You guys should be paid a whole lot. But the reality is this is a giant step forward. And I would urge all the school board members to please vote yes when we vote on this. It's important, and I'm very, very excited about this. So thank you, Mr. Ragsdale and staff, for putting this money where it belongs, which is raises for all of our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from the June 21st board meeting and the July 11th first tax digest meeting. If there are no objections to approval, they are approved. And we're ready to go with board business. Let's begin with Mr. Sweeney and the GSBA conference report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I attended the Georgia School Board Association annual conference, and previously each one of you were given copies of the legislative priorities adopted by the Legislative Committee, which then went before the Georgia School Board Association General Assembly, and the legislative priorities were adopted as they were presented with no modifications. And that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Thank you for representing us there and attending. We'll move along to discretionary pay proposals with Mr. Morgan.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see everyone at our board meeting, and I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to delve into this board agenda item. I'm always trying to think of ways and opportunities and avenues to advance how we do business as a school district, especially when it comes to compensation. And I had a conversation recently with a police officer in Cobb County. He's a major in Precinct 2. The gentleman's name is Scott Hamilton. He and I were having a conversation, and I said, Scott, what's the pay structure for police officers in Cobb County? He said, well, there is pay differential based upon what shift you work. He said, if you work the first shift, you get pay differential if you work the second or third shift. And I said, I assumed the logic, but I said, why is that? He said, well, second and third shift, the responsibilities are far greater. And what you will potentially be dealing with on the second and third shift is far greater than what you would be dealing with if you're on the first shift, by and large. So I thought about that, and then I tried to correlate and connect that to how we do business. I have a pop quiz to ask everybody on this school board. What year do you think the single salary schedule was put in place for education? Anybody? What year?
Can you repeat the question?
What year do you think the single salary pay schedule was put in place in education?
1954.
54. Okay. Anybody else have a guess? 78. You're looking at me, Sweeney. We've been working together a long time. What you got? 1950. The first that salary schedule was implemented in Des Moines, Iowa in 1921. Anywhere. Single salary pay schedule. Think about how much it's changed since 1921. And that salary schedule is the same thing that we use in 2018. 3 more years, we will have a century of using the same model that was used in 1921. One other quick thing I want to mention before I get into the actual what I want to propose. Can anyone guess what was the impetus of a single salary pay schedule? What was the driving force behind it? Any guesses? Somebody take a stab at it. What was the driving force behind it? What you think, brother? The government?
I wasn't born that early.
You weren't born in 21? Oh,
How
okay.
about gender inequity?
I'm born in 21. Like, did he do that to be funny? He just being serious.
Well, he's serious. He wasn't born.
Yeah, I got it. Not that far later, though. Randy hit the nail on the head. It was gender inequity. Women were being shortchanged by societal forces, we'll say, when it came to pay. So here we sit in 2018, and it seems like some novel idea to say, wow, you know what? Let's look at these industries. The medical profession, law enforcement, anything dealing with sports. Whether you talk, and I go back to the medical profession, whether you're talking about nurses or you're talking about doctors, I don't care what you're talking about. Those industries recognize through pay differential pay. There is no, hey, you step 4, this is what we're going to give you. The last bastion that holds on to what we currently have is education. I say all of that to say this. similar to what we do in law enforcement in Cobb County, where we have pay differential in Cobb County. Again, Major Scott Hamilton, Precinct 2, if you want to check it. I think, just to open the door, I think that we should, at the very minimum, and I would love to obviously get our superintendent's opinion on this.
Don't be dragging me in this.
I'll drag you across the finish line, man. I think that when you have a principal in a Title I school, that job is more challenging and difficult than if you have a principal who's at a school that's not Title I. I believe that job is more, it takes a different type of person to do that job well. I think that we should look at pay differential for principals who lead our Title I schools. I think that would be very similar, again, to what is done in Cobb County in terms of law enforcement, in terms of if you work the second and third shift, they're by and large saying your job is harder. Your job is harder. You working at 2 o'clock in the morning, so when they call for a domestic disturbance, it's different than 11 o'clock in the middle of the day and you have to go deal with this or deal with that. I think that I would hope that I could get agreement on that point. Having said that, I do think it would behoove our school district to have pay differential for Title I schools, and I would like to ask our superintendent and his staff to explore feasibility of potentially implementing something along those lines. And so my direct question, Mr. Superintendent, is, I know you said don't drag you into it, but I'm gonna ask you, bruh, what do you think about that?
There is, first and foremost, Title I is something that's not just, thrown out there willy-nilly. It's based on statistics and socioeconomics and free and reduced lunch. So there are reasons behind why a school is designated as Title I. I think that it would be logical to say that Title I schools are more challenged to make the same academic progress as non-Title I schools. So I will definitely say there is certainly something to be said about a Title I school that is able to make gains and trend upward in academic progress. So that being said, I would tend to say that yes, it's more difficult to be a principal in a Title I school as equally as it is more difficult to be a teacher in a Title I school. So it is very important to make sure you've got the right team in place in every school. And we've said this many times before, there is no one recipe for success in any two schools, even if the schools are similar in nature. That being said, I think it's definitely worth looking at an analysis of, number one, what can be done, because again, everything that refers to pay is an increased weight on the budget. So we would definitely need to do a thorough analysis before, yes, even if it's a great concept, we got to be able to afford it. So I think there's some definite due diligence that we would need to do before we said, okay, yeah, we're in a position to do this, regardless if it's deemed to be good, bad, or indifferent. And also, it's worth noting that we should go back and look at what has been done in this district prior, because I know that when I first came to the district, there were some things in place for teachers at traditionally lower performing schools to get them to stay. And so that was ended because it was deemed not to be successful. And I think that regardless of what kind of differentiation you're looking at for pay, that it's, academic performance is why we exist. So looking at that has to be a significant factor in any of that. Not, I don't think just because you're in a particular designated school should denote, okay, well, you're on a different pay scale, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of nuances and a lot of parameters that need to be analyzed before we would be able to say, yes, it's a good idea. No, it's not a good idea. It will be a good idea if A, B, and C, but not X, Y, Z. So I would not be opposed to doing, to doing that analysis and doing that legwork and due diligence to make sure that we're providing accurate information before we embark down that path. Thank you, Mr. Agnew. Mr. Scamahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of comments that I'd like to make is to try to help Mr. Morgan. It is to help you. The single pay chart, though, is a little bit of a misnomer because we don't pay all our teachers the same. High school pay scale is a little more than middle school, and middle school is, at least for administrators.
Principals.
Okay.
Not for teachers.
That's true. And then middle school is a little more than elementary school. Now, to teachers, to your point about teachers, is who has more pressure to do better or to maintain? The gifted students or the AP classes, because they're pushed very hard to maintain that, or students at the lower end that's being pushed to make an acceptable grade. I don't know, as a former teacher and still an educator, and hope to always be an educator, as to how you sort that out as to who's under more pressure. The other thing is, and I brought up in years past too, is not just for salaries, but critical needs, whether we need a English teacher at X school or a physics teacher at Y school. Maybe we do have a need for a supplemental pay scale, but little interest is shown in that, and that's okay. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I'm always interested in trying to improve our system and to improve attracting quality people, but we do look at it in the terms that best we can from a public standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scamahorn. Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To carry this analysis in a little bit further, you made the statement that a Title I school principal has a lot of challenges. True. But is it any more than a non-Title I school that has 1,300 or 1,200 students? Is that any more challenging or less challenging than a Title I school with maybe 700 students?
Yes.
So, which one is the most challenging? I'm wondering, would you differentiate salaries based on the number of students, the location of the school, Title I versus non-Title I? How would you rationale how to come up with a salary schedule that's equitable based on all the different criteria that each school has? I'll address that to Mr. Morgan.
You want to respond, Mr. Morgan?
Yes. I think that's why it's judicious for us to allow the superintendent and his staff to study all the factors and variables that might be involved in something like pay differential for or potential pay differential for principals in Title I schools. So I think the superintendent will do their due diligence and bring us back whatever findings they might have to see what those factors and variables might be. But I do undoubtedly firmly believe that the challenges, the workload at a Title I school is more significant. And that's not to take away or diminish how hard it is just to be a principal, period. It's a challenge in itself. But I do think that it's more challenging and difficult if you at a Title I school.
So you believe that a school with 1,200 students, say elementary school, versus one that is a Title I with 700 students, a Title I school would actually be more challenging?
Yes, I believe Title I schools are more challenging regardless to enrollment discrepancies. I think that Title I schools are more
Can
challenging.
you tell me why you think that would be more challenging?
Yes, I think that you're dealing with more variables and factors. Typically, if you're at a Title I school, it's not always the case. Typically, the students are not going to come in as prepared academically. Also, you're going to be dealing with a lot more. You have a tendency of dealing with more societal issues in terms of family dynamics and things of that nature that makes it more challenging and difficult to deal with that across the board, as opposed to if by and large everyone is showing up and everyone is in a relatively good place when it comes to being a student.
How would you analyze the difference in the amount of education or the duration of the education, the longevity and that sort of thing for a principal in a title, no matter what school it is? How would you differentiate that?
I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're asking.
Well, a principal that's got 10 years as an AP and or maybe 5 years as a principal, and a principal that's got 5 years of AP and 1 year of principal, should they make the same? And we don't do that now. We have discrepancies in the different schools.
Well, I believe that everything should be. I think everything should be based upon the value that you add to a particular situation. An example that I would give, and he probably going to say, "Oh, you're just saying this," but I wouldn't say, "Well, Superintendent A is making $50,000, but they've been doing it 8 years." If I think that Chris is adding tremendous value to this school district, then $50,000. I'm not going to limit his earning potential just because maybe he hasn't done it as long. I think it should be more about the value you add.
Keep dragging me into this.
Keep driving you in there. Because they know you, Chris. They like you. Everybody up here don't like me, okay? Let's just put it out there like it is.
Well, we know it, man.
Yeah, right. So I think it should be the value you add. I think that should be the top barometer. That should be number one, regardless of whether you're talking about education, you're talking about any other industry. The value add should ultimately, I think, not only drive how much you have, but your earning potential. And I think that is the way that you truly, that's one of the best ways to have the best and brightest.
Well, that adds another dimension, because now you're having to define what is value. And that could be anything.
That could be anything, but I think when you look in education, singular most important thing is how are we impacting student learning? I think the only thing you might put over student learning is student safety. But student learning, I think that is the tip of the spear, so to speak. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. But again, what I'll say to you, Mr. Banks, is that's why I think it's judicious on our part to allow the superintendent and staff to do their due diligence and then come back to us and say, hey, this is what we found in terms of why it is feasible or why it's not feasible. But I do think that it is worth this board's time to explore that, because I think that we owe it to the people, not only to principals, but to all employees, to always look for avenues and opportunities to compensate.
And I could support that. I think your topic is very interesting, and I'm not sure we're too far off the mark, but if we are, we need to find out.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I'd like to take a personal privilege here and ask Mr. Morgan, are you advocating we pay for performance? Are you going to grade these principals on their kids' academic grades?
Well, I think that when you talk about it, if you just narrow it down to academic performance, I think that's too small of a measure. And I feel like that's where education has gotten bogged down in terms of having progress on this. One of the best analogies, and I've said this many times over, one of the best ways to determine the value that you add, when you look at, let's look at Freddie Freeman, the baseball player for the Atlanta Braves, the first baseman. They don't just look at his batting average. They don't just look at home runs. They don't just look at RBIs. They don't just look at on-base percentage. They look at all of that stuff, and they determine the value that he brings in totality. There's no reason under the sun that we can't do the same with principals. You don't just say, okay, your CCRPI score was 73, you don't get it. There's a wide swath of meaningful things that you can gauge to determine value and impact. So I don't think it's just academic performance. Is academic performance a part of the narrative? Yes. But it's not the end-all and be-all, and I feel like people who've done a really good job of keeping us mired and not making progress, they frame the issue as if, well, they just want to use a test score, and you're going to say who gets it and who doesn't. Nothing could be further from the truth. So academic performance, I think, should be a part of the narrative, but not the entire narrative. And I go back to what I just said to Mr. Banks. That's why I think it's really important to allow the superintendent and staff, to see what they might find out and then apprise the board of what, we might be able to do or what we might not be able to do.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mrs. Thayer, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. If I could bring us back to what Mr. Morgan first stated, was the point of this agenda item was to pay principals in Title I schools more than other principals, right, Mr. Morgan? That's what you originally said. Okay. First place, I think anytime it's good that we can open the door to these comments, but I think we are way far too removed to make final decisions on those things. We get input from staff, as we said, from Mr. Ragsdale, area assistants and principals to find out what the feeling is. But having had experience as a principal of a Title I school that was smaller than the large schools, I will weigh in and tell you it is much harder because you have the same number of football games, you have the same number of basketball games, same number of tennis matches, same number of PTA meetings, and on and on and on as the larger schools, but you have less staff to attend those administratively. You still have to attend all of them. You still have to cover them, but you have fewer staff to cover them. So your staff works harder. You also have more discipline referrals. You have a higher expectation with you have to be in more classrooms. You have more expectations. You have to be in the hallways constantly because generally you have more supervision. So you work harder during the day and you work harder at night. So absolutely, positively, there is no doubt in my mind that principals in smaller Title I schools work far harder than principals in larger non-title schools do. So I would be one that would absolutely support paying more for those principals. And I'm not about to cry. It's, again, allergies sometimes just attack my vocal cords. But anyway, I do get passionate about these things, but I'm not about to cry right now anyway. So that was my comment. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thayer. Mr. Scamahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of thoughts or questions for Mr. Morgan or whoever. One is instead of trying to create a new, reinvent the wheel, why don't we just add a couple more administrators and lower the class size?
Here.
If it's Title I, if the rest of us are pulling 35 students per class on average, 40 in some, And Title I's doing the same thing. We just mandate smaller class sizes if you're declared a Title I, and add one or two more or whatever. I'll defer to how many more administrators. Just add that. Then we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Well, a couple thoughts on that. First, I don't believe it has to be an either-or proposition. I don't think that it has to be, well, if I lower your core class size, I can't give you more money, or vice versa. Secondly, that's why I think that the different vantage points that have come out during this conversation, I think that's, I'm sure, superintendent and staff, they're taking these things in, and they'll be able to come back to us and say, hey, this is what we found out through communicating with staff and whatever other means they reach their conclusions. But I think that's what's so useful, is that they can take these different vantage points and see what might work best for Cobb when it comes to differentiating pay, or potentially differentiating pay based upon the type of school where you work. And one other quick thing I want to say, I want to really underscore. I want principals to know, Title I, non-Title I, certainly believe that you work hard and that the job is challenging. There's no easy principal job. All of it is hard when you're doing it well. So I don't want anyone to say, oh, I'm being shortchanged because I live in this particular part of the school district. All of it is very, very challenging. So I don't want anyone to be under the notion that we don't think that you don't work hard or that your job is not challenging.
Mr. Scamahorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up. Mr. Morgan also said that the test scores shouldn't be the primary thing or the ultimate thing. We should look at other factors. And I don't disagree. As one that finished in the middle of the bell curve most of the time, I always went to my teacher or instructors and tried to get them to move me up. But somehow or another, they just wouldn't listen to me. So I'm not sure how we overcome that. But again, I'm all ears. So, I'll leave it at that. Oh, my other comment real quick. As tough as principals' jobs are, being an assistant principal is just as tough, especially depending on what principal you're working for. Oh, I digress. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, I put a bow on this conversation by asking, Mr. Superintendent, what kind of time frame? We've been working together too long, right? You already know what I was about to say. What kind of time frame would you say you guys need to be able to take a deep, thorough? Because we're not looking for something, in a month or two. But what type of time frame do you feel like it's realistic?
So on this one, I'm going to have to just really say I don't know, because we're going to have to dig into it pretty deep. Because again, I want us to go back and look at what the district has done historically, what those reasons were for implementing any of those particular initiatives, and then see if we can find out why they were ended. So that being said, I would tend to say that this is something that could be discussed during the budget process, because obviously this is going to be a budgetary discussion. So we need to take a couple of things, and actually more than a couple under consideration, because just like when we get to the item for amending the budget, there's sustainability considerations that have to be taken to make sure that, again, the last thing we want is to put something into implementation and then we have an economic downturn, correction, whatever you want to call it, and then we start having to look at difficult decisions. So we've always got to keep those things in the back of our mind. But I think, to do due diligence, I'm certainly, saying, yeah, absolutely, we can do that. Very willing to do that. But at this point in time, don't have a yay or a nay, positive, pro or con, opinion on it right now.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Exo. Ms. Thayer, you had a comment?
I do, thank you. I do want to echo what Mr. Morgan said. I certainly would not want anything that I said to be construed that I don't respect all principals in our district because I have too much respect for that position and our people who work so hard in that. So I do respect everyone. I also honestly feel that to solve the problems in our schools, no matter what you pay those principals, they can't work any harder. And then I think they would feel guilty. What about their assistant principals and what about their teachers? So I'm not sure that paying those principals more is solving the problem. The problem can only be solved by lowering pupil-teacher ratio and putting more staff there. And that's the only way to solve the problem and make it really equitable in our schools to have Title I experiences truly more realistic to the others. Is to equal the playing field and put more staff there. So again, it would be just a small thing that would probably not have that much impact truly on the whole problem. So
I was
Morgan?
finished, man, and then
I'm sorry.
I was finished when Chris. This is my vantage point. If I were still a principal and someone said, you've been working with the same conditions for 7 years, class sizes, whatever, right? And someone said, hey, do you want to make more money doing what you've been doing for the past 7 years? Or do you want to make the same amount of money, but I reduce the amount of people that class sizes? I would say, well, I've already been dealing with it for 7 years. I'm used to it. I'm used to dealing with this. But if you can give me some more earning power or potential, let's roll with that. And I think that, again, just like any program, just because this is where it starts, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where it would end in terms of, but I do, again, think that at this point, it's a lot of conjecture. But I do feel like it is right by the people that are leading our schools because the culture of every school starts with the leadership. I do think it's doing right by them to explore the issue, let the superintendent and staff do its job, and come back to us with what they believe is feasible, whether you're talking about budget constraints or possibilities or whatever the case might be. And I think then we will have more definitive grounds to say what we might be able to do or what we might not be able to do.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mrs. Gamhorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I was done too, but I wanted to emphasize what Ms. Thayer said. He said it so much better than I tried to say it, so thank you. And the other thing, Mr. Superintendent, I was in the system when we tried that bonus thing to move teachers to, I guess, schools that we perceived needed it. I'm not going to name any schools. I don't know all of the schools, but that did that. But it didn't last very long. And I think one of the things, and you are very aware of this because you preach to us, and I say that in a good way, about being careful of fads that come and go, and that includes, I believe, the pay scale. But does, if anyone remembers the national teacher certification, we were promised everybody that gets that, and that was a lot of work. I didn't attempt to get it, but those that I know, and many did get it, they had to work hard to get that national certification because not only did they want the prestige, but they, more importantly, I think, wanted the money. And the money went away just a few years after all that work, So if, as you're looking into something, I would caution, to look at the things that didn't work besides just pay scale, the other incentives that didn't work too. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks again, Ms. Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Scamahorn. Mr. Sweeney,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I have a question about, and my understanding of the title programs from the federal funding standpoint is it's typically grant funding, very targeted grant funding predominantly. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's Title I comes from a federal grant.
Is there any provision within those that permits or allows for funding of additional salaries for leadership.
I need to do a little bit more research to see if the federal guidelines and state guidelines permit us to use it as almost like a supplemental pay beyond, if you're talking administrative pay.
Yeah, and my guess is the answer is no. But,
That is my initial guess, but I would need to double check in writing.
Yeah, and the reason I say that, and Mr. Scanmore, I do recall the incentives that we had done before, and I don't believe that we're doing that anymore. But you know, if we're going to tie things to Title I, for example, I mean, the funding for Title I can actually fluctuate a great deal. I was pulling up through the Georgia Department of Education that our federal funding in 2013 was $58 million, and it dropped the following year to $47 million. So, I mean, that's all subject to whatever may be happening in Washington, D.C. So if we're going to go down this path, I don't think there's any way that we could tie this to Title I funding for any particular reason. I guess the other question is that are we looking at this for the principal level only, or is this something that we're going to be looking at for deeper levels within that school and so forth? So the other thing I would like to, if we're going to take a look at this, I would also like to see if there is another district, for example, someplace that has done this and what the results may be from the expenditures going in that direction. I mean, just to be prudent with this. I mean, I understand Mr. Morgan's position, and you know, money is nice, doesn't solve all problems, but at the same time, you know, I think if we're going to go in this direction, we really need to take a deep dive into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. No further comments. We're going forward with the virtual school capacity and future opportunities with Mr. Morgan again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel that one of the things that I think would help our board is that if we can get an update on, as a district, where we are when it comes to virtual education and opportunities, where we currently stand, what are the different platforms that we currently have, and what opportunities might exist moving forward when it comes to our students and when it comes to student learning. So anything, Mr. Superintendent, that you and your staff might be able to equip us with so that we can learn, I'd be grateful for.
Yeah, definitely. So John Floresto's got some information, and let me just kind of kick that off with, that is something Cobb Virtual, CVA, as we refer to it as, Cobb Virtual Academy, we are looking at that, and we have been looking at that as an avenue to enter into a different realm of education, if you will. It's just my opinion, but at some point in time in the future, I believe that public education, more importantly, public educational institutions, will become more competitive. And the way you position yourself to be successful in that competitive arena will determine, you know, the fate of your existence to some degree, I think. And that's just my opinion. But that being said, there are plenty of other school districts, institutions, the like, especially now with students being able to take online high school from various sources, as long as they're accredited and those kind of things, and then move on into college. I think it's imperative that we look at expanding those resources for not only our students, but expanding resources that will be accessible from other students that don't necessarily live within the Cobb County School District. We have avenues for charging tuition, for example. And again, I think being on the leading edge versus catching up is the best place to be. So with that being said, I will also remind the board with CTLS, and I know that John is going to address this, but CTLS is being created and has been created with that in mind as well. So we are positioning ourselves to be able to take advantage of every opportunity for competitiveness, because just like we talked about with teacher raises and employee raises, to maintain our competitiveness, we have to maintain a competitive level with academic performance and resources that are available to our students and staff. So that being said, I think that what you're going to see moving forward into the future, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know if it's in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or what have you, but I think that school districts are going to become more like, and Shadi, don't quote me on this right now. It's going to be on TV, and that's enough. But there's always been this, this comparison that people want to make. Well, you ought to run a school district like a business. Well, you can't do that. And it's just that simple. There are components that you can run as a business, and you better run as a business. For example, the financials. If you're not running the financials as a business, you're going to get in trouble, and many school districts have. So this is one of those components, I think, where school districts are going to be forced into running like a business, and those that are more astute and competitive are going to be at the top, and those that are not are going to be subjected to being on the losing end, I think. And that, what I mean by that is we have to position ourselves as a school district. We're the second largest in the state, 23rd largest in the nation, and what we have to do is position ourselves to make sure that we are going to be as competitive as we can be. We have the greatest teachers in our school district of any in the state and the nation. That's just the way it is, because we're better in Cobb. Now, that being said, if you have the opportunity as a parent that doesn't necessarily have the advantage of living in the Cobb County School District attendance zone, well, then why should you not be able to take advantage of the great teachers that we have as well? So CVA is one of those avenues that we're looking at as an easy, low-hanging fruit pathway to being able to get to that point. Obviously, the first target is to make sure that our students have access to as many available resources as possible. And then once that takes place, then, we can look at, students outside of the attendance zone and state and those kind of things. So, John, I hope I didn't steal too much thunder.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sit here and put what the boss said on repeat. But if I can actually, just to begin by echoing a little bit of what he said, the superintendent speaks often. We don't create solutions to backfill a problem. We start with the problem to create the solution. And if we have a problem today in our county in education, it's that our students are exposed to a wide variety of options. Superintendent just referenced, you can take a class here, you can take a class there, whether it's online or otherwise. And so if I can, as I begin, in Cobb County over the course of the last 15 years, we have a variety of programs and platforms that operate in the digital space. We have Cobb Virtual, which I'll provide an update on here in a moment. We have credit recovery. We have instructional technology in the classroom. And if and as there's an opportunity, it's for us to apply the Cobb brand, which is just better, to what we do inside the digital space so that we can serve our customer, to use that private term, better. And again, the customer, our students and our families demand that, particularly inside of the digital space, because it's 2018 and it's not 1998 anymore. And we've just come to a different place in education. And so CVA is certainly on the front end of that commitment that we in Cobb have made over the course of the last 15 years. Cobb Virtual Academy has been supporting Cobb students by offering high school students during both the school year and summer term for the last 15 years. We currently offer 37 courses in a 100% virtual environment, and I think it is important to note that Cobb Virtual, and when we think about virtual learning, that term is 100% virtual. We do have other programs, as I referenced, that are maybe you could use the word blended, some virtual and some traditional. I'll come back to that here in a moment. Those 37 courses allow students to take courses as either a supplement to their traditional high school schedule or as part of their high school schedule from a Cobb County high school as part of their traditional schedule. When taken to supplement those regular school schedules, our students have the opportunity to take those courses for free currently during the school day. When taken outside of the school day, they are able to take those courses for a fee. CVA courses are designed, built, and supported by Cobb County content experts, all locally designed, customized by us, are taught by 130 part-time certified teachers, and the grades earned become part of their official academic record. All courses are NCAA certified and meet national, state, and Cobb County School District curriculum standards. The Cobb County Virtual Academy has grown significantly over the last 5 years, and when you talk about growth and opportunities for growth, the last 5 years have certainly illustrated that the community prefers our product, to use that term. The number of students who have chosen the Cobb County Virtual Academy has grown from just over 1,900 in 2013 to over 3,000 in 2018. In 2018, 255 students used CVA for their full-time academic needs. Students from across Cobb County are enrolled in CVA courses with high enrollment numbers from each corner of the county. And if I can, if that's where we are today as a program, as a virtual school, I will wrap up my comments and provide opportunity for any questions you may have by saying that there is a unique opportunity that we have here in this county as a commitment, due to a commitment by our superintendent and you as a board, as we've built out CTLS. CTLS provides us an opportunity to have locally controlled, customized academic content built by us, not by a vendor out in Palo Alto, California, that we can deliver to our kids so that we know more about what our kids know and put that in the hands of our teachers so they can modify their instruction on a daily basis. That is a unique opportunity to us because most school districts, and in fact, I don't know of another one, who has a resource that has been committed to, built, and invested in over the course of the last 4, 5, 6 years, maybe longer, that allows us to, again, customize our instruction for our kids as opposed to being beholden to a platform designer off in a software development suite someplace. And so if there's an opportunity, I would say as we go forward, there certainly is. The superintendent just recommended or referenced, I should say, a variety of opportunities to expand what the CVA program is potentially inside of Cobb and maybe even outside of Cobb one day. CTLS will be a big part of that. It has to be a very big part of that if we're going to be able to empower our teachers the way that we want to. Our vision from a digital instruction point of view is not to take a computer and put it into the hands of a kid, to take a computer, put it in the hands of teachers so that they're empowered to know more about their students and make instructional decisions. So with that, I provide my update, and I'm welcome to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Floresta. Mr. Morgan, question?
Yes. First, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Superintendent. And John, you referenced unique opportunities. Can you drill down a bit and give us a forecast of what those unique opportunities might encompass in terms of expanding the Cobb brand when it comes to virtual schooling or blended learning or whatever the case might be?
Yeah, sure. So let me go back to that comment about multiple programs and tools. We currently have instructional technology in the classroom, iRespond units. We currently have credit recovery program. It's using a platform in partnership with myself and Jennifer Lawson, the academic division. The first opportunity is to baseline and say, hey, here's what we believe in Cobb County is quality digital instruction, whether that's in a program number 1, 2, or 3. To do that, we're going to need to bring those resources inside of one house, virtual house, for lack of a better term. And if I was sitting in another district, I'd say, well, we're stuck like everybody else. And so maybe step one to answer that question would be to bring our resources and our programs inside of one virtual space, and that's CTLS. And again, we're uniquely positioned in that. Once we're able to offer a student and a parent one virtual ecosystem, for lack of a better term, I'll use the analogy of the iPhone and your Android. Once we don't have to flip back and forth between operating systems, we've got an opportunity to say to a parent, to a student, hey, here's what your student knows, and it all lives in one place. And you might be hearing some more about CTLS, what we're going to call CTLS Parent, here in 2018 at another time. But So if I started and said step one, opportunity might be let's bring all of our digital supports under one roof, so to speak. Two would be we can answer more specific questions more easily for our parents and students about what their students know. And then third, it might be to be able to offer that outside of the borders of Cobb County. And I think if I can say there's a three-step process, I kind of just made that up as I said it, but those are the opportunities as we look forward.
Let me tag onto that too, because one of the things that I want the board to make sure that we don't lose sight of is that John is right. So this has been about an 8-year effort. Okay. Those of you that were on the board can remember the first time that we put in student response systems. You know, student response systems were not met with open arms. It wasn't like we were selling ice cream. So that was a hurdle we had to get over, right? CTLS, when we first rolled that out 2 years ago, again, that was not like we were selling ice cream. But once the teachers saw what the fruits of the labor would be from going through this system, now it's the educator kicked in and said, wow, I've got data to make decisions with, which is one of our 3 priorities. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is to make sure that we connect all the dots to form the circle. When we have modified the way that we acquire resources, okay, we no longer every 7 years go out and buy textbooks from whatever vendor has the best bid, lowest bid, for all the nonsensical items that come with the book that nobody ever uses. But they're free, so it's got to be a great deal. The way that we acquire resources now is drastically different than any other school district in the nation is doing. We have other school districts contacting us to say, hey, how are you doing this? Because the word is spreading. CTLS, let's not forget what the C stands for. It's Cobb. We didn't go out and buy an LMS off the shelf and have to adapt the way that we teach, the way our students learn to a package. We built it. So my point in all of this is to say everything that we do has a strategic direction. It's not that we're out here, you know, that each one of these divisions represented in executive cabinet is out there doing their own thing. That we're going to do something different in teaching and learning, we're going to do something different in technology, and the principals are going to do their own thing at every other school. We are connected. That's why when I taught, those of you that were there heard me say to the new teachers, one of the things that we do in Cobb that is pretty unique to Cobb is we maintain consistency. We don't change our vision and our mission statement every year so it sounds better. We don't change our priorities. And those priorities are important because when we say we're going to use data to make decisions, we got to be able to back that up. It's not just words on a screen. So to back that up, CTLS, all of the components that go into CTLS, and it's even if a vendor wanted to create CTLS, number one, it's hours and they can't do that. But past that, it would take years to start from scratch for a district to be able to do this. Now, are we going to be selfish? Well, for a little bit, yes. But once we get to that point of being able to have an opportunity like CVA and be able to open up CVA to other students in other districts and other states, that kind of thing, that becomes a different path, parallel to what we're doing within Cobb, but a different path nonetheless, because you're talking about students that are not physically inside this district. So all of that to say, we have to be very strategic and very tactical when we are looking at implementations that we are doing in the district. So just changing the way we acquire resources was not just to change the way we acquire resources. We could have still kept on keeping on every 7 years, put a bunch of books in here, and they come and look, and then every kid has a book, and then that's the way we teach, which is, again, one of the talking points I've always used. There's not another industry on the planet that has been able to do the same thing, basically the same way, for over 200 years, with somewhat success at doing it, other than education. So there's a lot of people going around saying education's broke and we got to get with the times and these kind of things, and I totally disagree with that. Education is definitely not broke. If it was, you wouldn't see the amount of academic achievement and the levels of performance we have in this district. So it's definitely not broken. That being said, there are things that we can do better by tweaking what we do and modifying what we do to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. If you've got people in a rowboat and they're not rowing in sync, you're going to go in a circle. You're going to get nowhere but in a circle. In education, we've been too faddish. We've been too quick to jump on fads, and we've pretty much gone in a circle. We have made strides, and our students have exceeded and excelled our goals in spite of the educrats that have been in charge of everything. And what I mean by that is teachers have been able to overcome the hurdles put in front of them by administrators and administration that were not working in tandem with the teachers in the classroom. That's something that we do differently, and I'm dead serious when I say we do it better in Cobb, because we have teachers that are in sync with the principal. We have principals that are in sync with the teachers, that are in sync with the level assistant superintendents, that are in sync with cabinet and executive cabinet. If we're not all one team, and I come back to our mission, if we're not functioning as that one team, then the one person that's going to suffer is the student in the classroom that we're supposed to be preparing for success. A lot of words to say. My point in saying all of this was to the board is that when we put things in front of you that are different ways, new ways of thinking, of doing, it's all strategically connected to make sure that we're moving our district in the right direction such that we can attract and retain, more importantly, the best talent that we possibly can, both in the principal seat, in the assistant principal seat, and in the teacher seat. As I told the new teachers yesterday, they're the rock stars. They're the 9 players on the baseball field that everybody comes to see. But without the front office, without the grounds crew, without the trainers, then there wouldn't be a game to be played. So it all comes back to our one-team approach. And that's the most important thing, and that's why I spent this time connecting these dots, because the board and the superintendent is the start of the one team. And if we're not together, moving in sync, then it's just going to fall apart the further down the track that you get, because the train cannot keep moving without everybody working in the same direction. So I hope that made some sense. If not, too bad I'm not going to say it again.
Yeah, exactly. Checked out. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Mr. Ragsdale. Mr. Scammahorn, then we have Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but this is Mr. Morgan's topic. Did you have a comment before I?
No, go ahead, bro. I'll wait my turn.
Okay. Well, let me go back to what are we asking here? I know what I'm reading, but I'm not sure what we're asking. And then I'll move to my question.
I think, let me say what my perception is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Morgan, but I think you're just wanting kind of an update on the future expandability, the future of CVA. And then I think based on our conversation just now, we're going to do probably a much broader presentation of how CVA fits within CTLS, how CTLS provides the slot for CVA moving forward, kind of a broader picture of kind of what we've just been talking about.
Well, and the reason why I ask is in your comments just before I was recognized, you covered a lot of ground, but when I read this, I think, well, it's the same thing whether it's CTAE or how many math teachers we get or whatever, because the only difference between virtual and actual, I use that term, is distance. I mean, might be able to add more teachers to a virtual, more students to a virtual teacher to some degree, but so we should be assessing our capabilities in all of our programs. Have I got that wrong?
Well, when you get into things like CTAE is a little bit more difficult to have a path within CVA because of the nature of the CTAE courses, your hands-on, your co-oping, your internships, those kind of things. That being said, though, I think to your point, it's basically one big family of resources, if you will, because, like, for example, the Career Academy that's coming online on Osborne's campus, that's going to offer different resources for students that are looking at a different path to succeed. The virtual space is allowing students, for example, I'll just throw this out as one example. If a student is so inclined to get their classes in a much shorter time span to be able to graduate early, that's certainly a possibility through virtual classes, through things like CVA. It also allows additional time for students to have joint enrollment, for example, so that when they come out of high school, they've already got 2 years of college. To the parents, that's 2 years of free college, by the way. That's a huge benefit. Now, does that mean that every single student is going to jump on this? No, that's not what that means. Again, it's not for every single student. But what we need to do is make sure that we are preparing every group of students that we possibly can for whatever different path they're going to embark on.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to drive the train to is, well, let me bring in another thing. Whether it's school choice, CTA, or whatever, it's not that everybody's doing the same thing, but we should be analyzing and seeing what our capabilities are in order to, whether we can offer it to people. Like, we can't offer CTA to everybody. We don't have that capability, but we should be assessing our capabilities to see how many we can offer and what we should be offering. And that's what I'm taking away from, I guess, from with our topic, virtual school capacity and future opportunities, singling out virtual academy rather than, okay, like you were saying, we're all one team here, and everybody should be analyzing what we should be doing now as well as in the future.
Yeah, I think we are. I know we are. This particular item brought by Mr. Morgan was singling out CVA virtual school. We took advantage of the opportunity to say it's not just about virtual school, CTLS and the combination. It's really how CVA fits within CTLS. So that being said, we've had several presentations of CTLS over the course of the past 2 years that are quite lengthy because it harvests great conversations about what the direction of the district is and will be. So that being said, that's why I said the presentation to the board will be as in response from the virtual school capacity brought by Mr. Morgan, but also it'll be an expansion upon CTLS. Now, going down the CTAE route, that will be more of a presentation when we get into the Career Academy updates that we will be bringing, and there's been numerous conversations happening about that, but again, it's kind of parallel but concurrent paths. So they're not they are separate because different students are going to have different paths. So it's kind of difficult to roll everything up into one to say, okay, here's what we're doing for our students as one presentation. I think it's the best way to put that.
Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say that technology has changed education.
Yes, it has.
I made a statement not too long ago that was made by John Couch, who is the Vice President of Apple Computer for Academics, and he made the statement 15 years ago, technology was a tool. Today, technology is our environment. We have not embraced the environment in its capacity. We're starting to. We talk about CVA, which is a great tool. It enhances opportunities for students. CTLS gives us a lot of flexibility It enhances the academic process. Also, it gives the teacher much more feedback of where a student is at a particular point in time. And I am beginning to become convinced that the way we assess students is wrong. We assess students at a specific date and time on one day, and if you did the same assessment the next day, it would probably be totally different. It may be higher, may be lower. So we've got to find a way of assessing students of what they have actually learned, not memorized, but what they have actually learned that's going to stay with them, because it's just like human nature. We can read a book, and a year later, we probably won't remember a third of it, or half of it, or a quarter of it. So it's not the memorization that's important anymore, and that's the way we learned. But it's changed. Now is how do you find and where do you go to find the answer to a problem? And the internet and technology has given us that capabilities. If I want to know how to build a birdhouse, I can go on YouTube and find 100 different videos on how to build a birdhouse. Now, do I need to memorize every one of them? No. I want to build a particular birdhouse, I'll go find the particular video that tells me how to build that birdhouse. That's the same thing with academics. If a science teacher in biology wants to teach the students about the heart, there's probably 100 or maybe more YouTube videos that tell you everything you ever want to know about a heart. So, I just, CTLS has given us a situation where the teacher, like I said, can receive the point in time of a particular student, not just the cohort, but the particular student, where they're at. And I think we've added the capabilities for the parents to see what's happened with that student in the classroom on a particular day or assessment that's been made. So not only can the teacher get feedback, the parents now can get feedback. So the reinforcement is at home. So if we can get the parents involved in the academic process to a greater degree, then we're moving ahead. So this topic could probably be discussed for another 2 hours. There's some great things that come along, and there's things that are going to come, but they really don't even know about yet. So academics, education, in my mind, is not what I learned. It's not what we learned. It's not the way we learned. But we got to get it. We got to find a way to get down to the individual student and get them on a path that makes them very successful, more so than what we have been doing. And that's a radical change from what education has been for the last 200 years, like I say. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Morgan?
Yes, thank you. Right now, could a student let's take blended learning, right? Could a student in Cobb say, you know what, I take science and math virtually, and I go and take the other three in person? Can a student do that?
Yes, they can.
Okay, and that is, I guess, anywhere on the spectrum.
As long as it's offered by one of our 37 courses, yes.
Okay.
Let me ask for a point of clarification. Because I think where you were headed was what level. Mm-hmm. So what grades are represented in CVA?
Yeah, CVA is high school courses. It is taken by middle school students to some degree, but the vast majority of our students are high school students taking high school courses. The coursework is uniquely high school.
Okay. And forgive my ignorance on this, guys. I should know more about CVA, but so why not 6 to 8? Is that a cost? Is it cost prohibitive? Not enough interest, or Why, if I were in 6th, 7th, 8th, why can't I say, all right, I'm going to take these 2 over there, and I'm going to go up there and take those 3, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to bore the board with the technicalities of learning management system design, but the answer to that is it's complicated. And when I say that, I mean you're designing and building content from ground up on top of a platform that is uniquely ours. And so the answer to that question would be there certainly has been demand for the high school courses by high school students. As I referenced, participation has almost doubled over the course of the last 5 years. That speaks to the quality of the current program. Speaking of extending down to lower grade levels would take a significant amount of time and money to invest to develop our own content, or we're stuck in the same box as everybody else, which is we go buy prepackaged content from somebody else, and I'm not sure that's the direction that we want to go here in Cobb.
I think I had, and just for the sake of conversation, I do know this part, but let's just say someone is watching us right now. Credit recovery. Am I correct in saying I failed? Do they still call it Algebra 1? Or what do they call it? Algebra. I failed Algebra 1. Credit recovery. I can go in, virtually do it so that I pass the class. Is that the extent of credit recovery, or does it expand into something else?
So credit recovery as a program, which is supported by Jennifer Lawson, the academic division, is offered in school for students who have failed a course. They have to have failed a course at least one time. Then they're supported by a teacher physically in class, I would argue, in a more quote-unquote blended environment, digital platform with the teacher.
And finally, I know we had, in terms of CTLS, Cobb Teaching and Learning System. Cobb Parent, when does it come on board? And as a parent, and I know we've covered this, but just in case, when does it come on board? And as a parent, how will I be more empowered by Cobb Parent through CTLS?
So it's CTLS Parent.
Parent.
Yeah, CTLS Parent. So right now we have CTLS Assess, CTLS Teach, and CTLS Parent. There will be a CTLS student at some point in time. That's not going to be tomorrow by any stretch of the imagination. CTLS Parent, we're targeting to come on board online this fall. Okay, so now when it first comes online, it will not be fully completed. All right, so there'll be components available, but not all components. At the end of the day, the goal for CTLS Parent is much like that when we had Picasso. Those of you that remember Picasso. Picasso was very highly utilized by parents. It allowed them to see the curriculum, what we were teaching at that point in time. There's definitely different vocabulary used now for teaching and learning standards and those kind of things now. But it was highly utilized. It was highly sought after. Matter of fact, the state wanted to get in on Picasso. Picasso was built on an open platform so that it became hacked, and so Picasso went away. So that being said, CTLS Parent is kind of the rejuvenation, if you will, of Picasso to a degree, but that's the starting point. With CTLS Parent, the expectation is that a parent will be able to log into CTLS Parent, be able to see all of their students, number one, regardless of what level they're in, and be able to see all of their data. For example, you know, we do a lot of stress and attention on the RIMI, all right, and those assessments are given 3 times a year so that we can be able to obtain the information by student if they're on, above, or below grade level. A parent having that information is great, but a parent having that information presented to them, and then here are some selected resources on our system that you can utilize at home with your student. Now we're talking about parental engagement at a different level, and that's where we need to be. So ultimately, that's the 100,000-foot view of where CTLS Parent will be once it's fully implemented.
One other quick question. In terms of the receptivity that you referenced in your earlier statements, Chris, about CTLS, and it took some time for people to come on board, things of that nature. How are you able to say, you know what, there is a great deal of buy-in now? Are we at 50%, 60%? Do you do focus groups, or is that information you get from how do you assess that, wow, we've made significant strides in terms of CTLS from the teacher standpoint in terms of how they're leveraging it to be a more effective educator?
Yeah, we do that in a number of ways. When we first started rolling out CTLS, obviously we did surveys with teachers. I think one of the things that allowed a very high number of teachers to get tremendous buy-in is when they would make recommendations. We would actually take those recommendations, and we were able to track some of those recommendations that became part of the program. So once users see that the creators of the application are taking input, valuing the input, and truly creating a tool for the teachers to use in the classroom, I think that drives buy-in. Parents, it's going to be an endeavor, and we continue to track teachers, not individually, but how many teacher logins we have on CTLS, how many new logins we have, not just, the group of 33% that are leading edge early adopters, they're logging in 100,000 times a day. We're actually looking at, okay, how many new logins do we have? Is this really working? And it is. We get great input from the teachers. I'm anticipating the same thing from parents. Now, again, once we get CTLS Parent fully rolled out, then we'll be in the position of being able to have principals and teachers during their meet and greets and those kind of things kind of highlight to get the word spread about that, because parents are just like any other group of users. You're going to have about a third early adopters get on it. They're all over it, right out of the gate. But then you'll have the next third that are waiting to see how the early adopters use it. And then you're going to have another third that really doesn't care if you ever did it or didn't do it, whatever. But that being said, I mean, it will be an education point for us, for the community. I can't say enough about how far we have come in the past 2.5 years with CTLS. It really is tremendous. And I can't say enough about the entire team's effort, because this is not just a technology initiative. This is not just a teaching and learning initiative. This is not just a high school initiative. It truly is the entire team. And from the amount of time it took us to roll it out, we took 18 months to roll it out. So obviously we took our time to do it right. Because, it's always been my philosophy. If you're going to take the time to do it, take the time to do it right, so you don't have to take the time to do it twice. So that's how we've approached this. So,
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. Mr. Scammahorn, followed by Mr. Banks.
I've already asked my questions.
Okay, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask the superintendent, since we've been talking about CTLS and CVA, that he give us on a periodic basis some metrics of how we're progressing, because those metrics can give us a story, and that story can be shared with the public, so that the public not only is receiving the results of CTLS and CVA, but our story could be to the point where they understand and why we're doing it. It's easy to sit up here and talk about CTLS, and academic people understand it, but the important people are the parents and the public at large, understanding the innovation that's in CTLS and what's coming in the future, because we're just starting. We got a long ways to go, and we'll get better as time goes on. But we need to tell that story, and metrics will do that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one thing in our business practice, oftentimes we would have employees take online courses, and with mixed results, because many times that they're either lacking motivation, online courses aren't necessarily their cup of tea. There may be other things that may be technology issues and so forth. Do we have a way or are we taking a look at how students are doing with these courses today compared to the general student population? And then the next question is that if there is a person that says, this isn't really working out for me mid-year or mid-semester, can they then opt out of that and then just dive into a regular class?
So, I mean, your first statement, I couldn't agree more. It seems like, outside looking in, online classes should be easy. You can take them anywhere. It's so much more convenient, and that's again, it's making sure that we understand this is not for everybody. This is not for every student. That self-motivation component in a student is very, very important. Self-discipline is hugely important. So to that point, yes. I mean, we have to be able to monitor to make sure that we're not just putting up virtual classes to put them up. And the number of people we have, and we've got to make sure that the academic progress and achievement coming out of a virtual class is the same as coming out of a traditional class in a classroom. Now, that being said, though, yes, there are opportunities to get out of the online class, but just like any other class that you sign up for, it's more indicative toward college. There is a window to be able to drop that, and certainly at the semester level and at the beginning of it are the two windows that you can be able to do that and then transition back into a traditional classroom environment.
Okay, no more questions or concerns or comments? We have board agenda items now, Mr. Ragsdale.
Yes, sir. Let me just say, too, I appreciate the conversation because, mainly Mr. Morgan, I think he's looking at how many agenda items he can get on an agenda by the end of the year. I'm just messing with you, man. But
last year I did 27, going for 35.
Yeah, see? Yeah, exactly. He's keeping that stat. But the conversation that we've been having is about the things that matter, and that's academic performance. So I appreciate the conversation that we've had, and we will definitely bring you those updates from the perspectives that we've discussed. So that being said, Mr. Chair, members of the board, agenda item number 1 is the monthly occurring authorization of school properties disposable per district administrative rule DO-R, and that list has been sent to you electronically. Be happy to answer any questions.
Motion to consent. Unless there's an objection, that's a consent item.
All right. Agenda item number 2, I want to ask Brad Johnson to go ahead and come up. I'm going to kick it off. This is the recommendation to amend the FY 2019 budget. And there is only one modification that I'm recommending, and that is to change the 1.1% raise to 2.6%, increasing it by 1.5%. As we've already discussed a little bit, and we've heard from public commenters, et cetera, the county tax digest revenue, or the tax digest increased over our conservative estimate. And again, I can't say enough about, I would 100,000% rather be in the position that we're in than in the opposite position, which is we forecasted a much higher tax digest, and then it came in lower because then, after the budget's approved, we're in the process of having to make cuts. And other school districts have been in that situation, so it's not unheard of by any stretch of the imagination. So again, I appreciate and applaud Brad and Financial Services, everybody that's involved in that process. Now, that being said, it would have also been just as easy to say that, the budget's already been approved. Yes, we're getting additional revenue, but we'll wait till next budget to look at this. Instead, Brad and I and Executive Cabinet, and I've had multiple discussions with individual board members about, I feel like that it's the best thing for us to do this recommendation for one primary reason. Last year, we were not able to afford a 2% raise that the state applied to the state salary schedule. Now, again, I know it's repetitive for the 100,000th time, but when the state gives a raise, they apply it to the state salary schedule, which most of Metro Atlanta pays higher than. To our credit, we pay 21 to 26% higher than the state salary schedule. So that 2% was much higher than a 2% when you equated that money out to making a 2% raise for all employees or even teachers. The other point that I'll make too is that we have heard from our employees, we've heard from our principals that we do not want to differentiate between employees. If we're going to do a raise, we want to do a raise across the board for every employee. We've said it time and time again, and that is regardless of what position you play on our team, you play a vital role in student success, which is our one goal. So, that being said, not being able to afford the raise last year, we didn't try to give a raise last year. I think it's important to note that for our budgeting purposes, we are extremely cautious and we're very conservative with taxpayer dollars that have been entrusted to us as a district to expend on the education of over 113,000 students. Now, that being said, once we were put in the position to where we could afford to do the raise, I felt it was very important for us to go back and recoup that, not only that 2%, but then bump it up a little bit for this year as well to get it to the 2.6%. Now, we were able to do a bonus last year. I got many comments and emails about how positive that was received by the employees. I'm recommending that remain the same. Now, we did differentiate slightly this year in the bonus in that less than 238-day employees would receive the monetary bonus during the Christmas, the December paycheck at Christmas, as basically a Christmas bonus, if you will, while 238-day employees got a reduced number of work days with no reduction in pay, which was the week of July the 4th. So I'm making no recommendations to modify that, but I believe that it is important, and again, I stressed this to the new teachers yesterday when I spoke to them, that many of you have commented publicly that we wish we could do more for our teachers, but we simply can't afford it. And then the point to that is that when we can afford to do for our employees, we do. Now, I will tell you that this is not utilizing every dollar of the additional revenue realized by the increased tax digest. And there's a few reasons behind that. First and foremost, we're going to have a new governor come January. We don't know what kind of educational policies will be put in place. Remember that the ERC is still, the recommendations are still there in the governor's office about modifying and revamping the QBE formula. We don't know what ramifications, if any, that will have on us as a district. So, yes, it's recurring revenue, but I think it's very financially prudent for us to make sure that we're positioning ourselves not, holding out for the rainy day that we never say a rainy day has come, but making sure that we are financially stable, not only to sustain what we're putting in place, but financially stable in that our fund balance and our reserves are strong enough such that we should hit another time period, as mentioned by Ms. Rowe in her public comments. If there was another economic correction or downturn or what have you, we're financially in a position to be able to withstand that without having to cut any kind of employees or anything from the budget in that regard as we had to do in 2008. Now, that being said, I do want to say that one of the things we took into consideration was how to apply this. So it is going to be applied, assuming the board approves this, but also it's going to be for employees of the non-temporary employees, but also that will include substitutes. Because we feel like that is an area to where we have looked numerous times. Ms. Thayer, you've brought that up as a point of focus. And while it's not the end-all, be-all, certainly, that we don't expect this to do that, but we did want to include the substitutes. Matter of fact, I got an email from a retired teacher that is substituting and said that's great, the well-deserved raise, but, will this be included for substitutes? And so we did consider that, and that is included in this recommendation. So the 2.6% raise will also be applied to substitutes that obviously that will work during the year. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the board, agenda item number 2 is a recommendation to amend the 2019 general fund budget. On May 17, 2018, the board approved the 2019 general fund budget. The budget at that time included an estimate of 6% net increase in the property value digest. We were able to estimate that digest in concert with the Cobb County tax assessor. So we have a very good relationship with them. We work with them closely. Ironically, they estimate things conservatively as well, which I think is a good thing. After the board approved the budget, the district received the actual property value digest from the Cobb County Tax Commissioner's office, and it showed that the final growth, or net growth for us, was 8.21%. And just for everybody listening, that is a net growth, net of exemptions. So you have a gross digest and then you have exemptions, and the difference is the net digest growth. This higher net increase will result in more revenue than what was anticipated in the approved general fund budget for FY 2019. The administration recommends that the additional revenue be utilized to increase the 2019 salary raise for employees. When the 2019 budget was approved in May, the salary increase included in the budget was a 1.1% salary increase for all permanent employees. This amendment recommendation is to increase the raise from 1.1% to 2.6% for all permanent employees, including substitutes. And Mr. Chairman, administration recommends that the board approve this 2019 budget amendment.
Let me add one more thing to that, too, because Brad identified that this was a net of exemptions. And again, I want to be very, very clear when I start out this comment. We are not saying that we want to modify the 62 and over exemption in any way, shape, or form, that we're not against it. However, what I do want to, again, educate the public and the board and everybody watching is that that exemption went up again this year by $10 million. So we're at $110 million of recurring revenue just for one exemption. So that being said, though, the reason I make that comment is because I want to point back to we're not using every single dollar that we received in additional revenue. We're using the vast majority of it for the raise, but we're not using every single dollar because, again, looking at the trend of those exemptions, it's concerning, but it's just something we have to deal with. And again, I want to close that comment with the same thing I opened it with. We're not saying that we want to try to modify the 62 and over exemption at all. We just have to be very cognizant of what that means to our budget and whether or not we will be able to maintain and sustain what we're recommending.
And Mr. Superintendent, those are very wise comments, I think. Y'all know I'm conservative, but we try to take modest risks. That's difficult for me to do. But if I'm off, I'd rather be off to the good. But I will tell the board, too, that during the year, this is a decision we know that we were going to make tonight, where we don't have all the information. We never have all the perfect information when we make some of these decisions. But I just want to tell the board that we will be monitoring the financials as we proceed into the new fiscal year, and we will be looking at them very carefully to see revenue trends and expenditure trends. And the first time I see some type of an anomaly that's out of the norm, we will be telling the superintendent and the board as we proceed through the year. We can always be under or over budget. So we'll try to adjust as we go through the year before we start into the budget process next year.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you have them, I'd like to get some numbers from you. What's the dollar amount of the 2.6 raise in total?
Well,
I'm not talking about benefits. I'm talking about
how much is the cost of the raise?
Yes.
Okay, well, the cost of the raise, so the cost of a 1% raise for all employees is approximately $8.5 million. And if you multiply that times 1.5, it's $12.8 million approximately.
Plus the 1.1
But that's already in the budget.
I'm trying to come up with a total number
So you
of
got
actual raises.
So you got 12.8 plus 9 million that was already in the budget.
What was the
12.8 plus 9 million.
Plus 9.
So 21.8 million for the total.
Now, how much is TRS going to add to our obligation?
TRS. Well, incrementally on a salary is 21%.
Well, are you asking how much is the employer portion being raised this year, or are you saying how much is the raise impacting the employer portion?
How much will the employees get as a result of the raise, and how much will we have to pay in additional TRS and health care? Because those are going to be additional to whatever the raise is. Whatever we spend for the raise, we're going to have to match a percentage of the TRS. And that's additional amount.
I don't have the exact incremental increase amount, but when I give you those total amounts, I've already taken into account all those. I can get that to you.
Okay.
I just don't have it here with me.
I'm just curious, how big an impact did TRS really have as a result of this raise? And I assume we're using the additional expense will be coming out of the additional funds that we get. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, what Brad is saying is that when we say this recommendation, and I don't think we said it this way, neither he nor I, and I should have, that when I'm recommending the 2.6% raise, a 1.5% increase, we have run the numbers 6 ways from Sunday to make sure that it's sustainable, that what we're recommending is not only, we can afford it this year, but it is sustainable. And that includes the TRS portion when those numbers were run. So it's not like we're running them just based on without benefits and all that, yep, we're good. And then we add benefits and it's like, oh, wait a minute, we're 5% over budget kind of thing. So when Brad runs those numbers and Financial Services runs those numbers for sustainability reasons, right, all of those things are taken into consideration.
But the raise is one number and the benefits is an additional number.
So
it is.
Let me restate that, or let me make sure I'm perceiving that question right. So what you're saying is, does the $8.5 million, that's a 1% raise, include benefits?
Yes.
So that includes benefits. That's all inclusive. That's why when we say to do a 1% raise is $8.5 million, we've included everything. So there's nothing additional to come into that. TRS, healthcare, all benefits are included in that number.
And it's complicated.
Well, let's say we can uncomplicate it.
Well, it's complicated because when we prepare a budget in the prior spring, when we have the actual population of teachers, it may, we're going to have maybe a couple thousand new employees that make different amounts. So we're trying to estimate the best we can based on the population of employees from the year before and projecting at what it might be next year. And we always put in some type of estimate so that if we're off, we're to the good.
Okay, but we started with some big number, maybe, let's say $900 million. So we're adding another 2.6% to that as a raise, but associated with a raise is benefits. Now, my question again is the TRS employer portion and the healthcare addition above the 2.6 raise amount, or is it taken out of that 2.6? So they're really not getting a 2.6.
No, wait. Let's back up. So we're not increasing it by 2.6, first of all. We're increasing it by 1.5. Okay, so 1.1 was already in the budget, so we're recommending to increase that number by 1.5. To do a 1% raise is approximately $8.5 million. That's all in. That's all benefits, all everything. Okay. So when we take an additional 1.5 to that, that was the number that Brad was saying was 12 and change.
12.8 million.
That's all in. That's all in. That's all in.
Let me put it this way. You have salary, and then you have employee part of the fringe benefits, and then you have the employer share. Right. All of that's included in these numbers I give you.
Now, and hold on one second. Let me make sure that this is the last statement that we made according to that, or from me anyway. The 2.6% will be a 2.6% raise for the employee in their salary.
Wait a minute. No.
Yep. Hold on. So the scale, if you're making $50,000,
let's say $100,
you're going to make 2.6% more than that $100. That's going to be your salary.
Okay.
Okay. It's not going to mean that out of that 2.6%, we're going to pull benefits out of it and all that kind of good stuff. Now, that's going to be the way that raises are always figured, right? But when you look at the salary scale, if you were making $50,000 last year, you're now going to make at least $50,000 times 1.26.
Right. Okay. That's what I'm trying to get to. So the employer portion will also, out of that 1.5%, add to TRS obligations and to healthcare obligations to some amount.
It's included in that number.
But you said the employee would get the 2.6 in total.
Correct.
And they do have TRS coming out of their money.
Correct.
And they do have health care.
But the cost, employer, we're confusing the items. The 2.6% raise equals $12.9 million. Okay? $12.9 million is all inclusive of salary, benefits, employer portion of TRS. It's all inclusive. All of those costs affiliated with doing the additional raise is in that $12.9 million.
So it would actually be more than 2.6 in total.
No. Again, you're talking about two different things. We're apples and oranges. The 2.6% raise is a 2.6% raise for an employee's salary.
Right. But
the cost of the 2.6% raise is $12.9 million, which includes employer portion of TRS, any kind of employer paid benefits.
Which is over above the 2.6.
Right. That's right. Yes. Just say yes.
Yeah. Yes.
That is right.
Can I try to say it a little bit? We're giving a 2.6% raise on the employee salary.
Right.
That's one thing. And they will get that. And they will get 2.6% more on their check. They will see it. It'll happen. When I figured the number of $12.8 million, I figured the 2.6, but I also calculated in the employer benefits too to come up with that 12.8.
And that was my original point, that we're actually incurring a little bit more expense as a result of this increase in salary.
Well, that's every time we do something like
Right,
that. It's
right.
like that.
And that, my question was, how much is that? And that's what you said you would find out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
We've got another question before we go to consent on that.
Mr.
Ms.
Chair.
Thayer?
Unless there's further discussion, could I recommend this be a consent?
We've got a question here first, and then we'll go with that.
I have a short question. In looking at it, number one, I hope the public realizes that we wait and make sure that we have the money before we do give the raises. I think that's a critical point. We would love to give more all the time because we know our teachers are underpaid, but we do have to make sure we have the money first. Second thing, though, I think we only had 16 additional teaching positions in the budget in case we have in the pool. Did you look at that to see, do we need to add a few more there before we finalize this budget?
Yeah, we looked at that actually prior to that, and we feel very comfortable with the number of pool
you think we're
allotments
okay
we
there?
have. Yes.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, unless there's further discussion, I'd like to recommend this be consent.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question. So, and Ms. Thayer kind of hit on it, but one of the things that, we also hear about, and relative to the teacher-student ratios in 2008, 2009 period, that we know that, or we understand that we're a number of teachers shy to get back to those ratios, and the number has been floating, but I hear at least 800 and maybe up to 1,000. I don't know what the number is today.
It's between 8 and 900.
8 and 900. And what's the loaded cost on average for a teacher?
Well, TRS went up from 16% to 20%, so that increased it over 90,000.
So an average expense for in the loaded cost, and again, we're talking about the teacher salary and benefits and everything else, and taxes, state, local, everything. Right. So at 90,000, if we're 800 to 900 teachers shy, just to put it in perspective, that's $72 million to $81 million. Okay, and we're not seeing those kinds of numbers come out from the revenue bump. So we can't get there today is a challenge. And, I still do hear, about classroom size issues and concerns from parents across the county. So and again, I'm just trying to illustrate and bring into perspective what that gap really looks like. It's $72 to $81 million. It's another number. One of the things, and I don't know if you've gotten any information on this, but while I attended the Georgia School Board Association conference, there was a presentation that was done by the administrator for the teacher retirement systems. And he seemed to think that there may be, and I think I shared this with the superintendent, that there could potentially be a decrease in the actual contribution required. So that would give some additional relief, I think, not only on our expense side, but also the teachers as well. I don't know that's going to be in the current budget, but hopefully we'll see some of that. And largely because of how robust the economy has been, as well as increases in teacher salaries, more people paying into the system. So I think those are all really, really positive developments. Thank you. And just a point, while I concur with your wish, Mr. Scammahorn, I think we should actually maintain this as a discussion item because we do have one other one other hearing this afternoon.
I didn't hear the last part of that.
We still have a budget hearing this afternoon, so because of that, I think we should still maintain this as a discussion item.
Yeah, I withdraw my request.
Okay.
Thank you.
Without objection, that is a discussion item. Which brings us to number 3.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Mr. Johnson to continue on with agenda item number 3 with the millage rate adoption.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. Agenda item number 3 is a resolution to adopt a millage rate. And the 2018 School District Tax Digest has been received by Cobb County from the Cobb County Tax Commissioners. The Cobb County School District must establish the annual millage rate to fund the 2019 budget that you already approved in May. The general fund budget was approved by the school board on May 17th, 2018. The 2019 general fund revenue budget was developed with the assumptions that the district would experience some digest growth and that the district would not increase the existing general fund millage rate of 18.9 mils. The school district is holding 3 public hearings in order to maintain the revenue associated and generated by property digest growth and assessments. The administration recommends that the board authorize a resolution to establish the net 18.9 millage rate to meet the approved 2019 budget, general fund budget. Mr. Chairman, those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And consent? Or discussion? Discussion. Okay. Mr. Ragsdale, number 6.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Mr. York to come forward and bring the next agenda items.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Superintendent, members of the board, we've had 3 administrative rules submitted for review. Here just to answer any questions you might have on those.
Thank you, Mr. York. Any questions?
Kind of real quick, procedural question. Did you already give us a hard copy of that, those the last time when these, we used to get hard copies, and I'm not sure if it was during the work session or the final. So
No, those come via email with the board agenda that comes out.
So if we had questions as we were here, we'd have to go back into our email or have them pre-written or whatever. That, my question is
Yes,
that
sir, but
I
if
see
you
an
want
advantage to be able to have a hard copy.
if you want hard copies moving forward, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, and I'm not specifically meaning this, I would just mean it, unless the superintendent has an objection. I'd like to see a hard copy so we could scan it real fast if we needed to. Is that?
Absolutely. Okay. Yes, sir.
Do you see any, I want to make sure that you're okay with it.
Yes, sir, that's fine. We'll just have copies here at the board meeting when you arrive each
Okay.
evening.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any consent or discussion?
Well, those are no. Yeah, there's a no vote.
Automatic, glad. Okay, then we have approval of the agenda, and if there's no objection, the agenda is approved. I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel and land or legal. Ms. Thayer, Mr. Sweeney seconds. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. We are now adjourned to executive session.